So last night, the Denver Nuggets and the Minnesota Timberwolves played game one of their Western Conference semifinal series, and it was definitely everything that we expected. It was going to be a competitive game, and it was a competitive game. And I think the edge to Minnesota is going to be present throughout this series. So the reason that I say I think the Timberwolves have the edge here is that when the Nuggets played the Lakers, both the Nuggets and the Lakers are both slow teams. The Lakers are old and slow. Denver just prefers to play at a slower pace. They're much more disciplined, much more talented, can do better in the half court, less transition game than a faster team per se like Minnesota. Versus Minnesota has a lot more size, so they can play a lot more physical, and they can really get up and down the court pretty easily, especially considering that their star is only 22 years old in Anthony Edwards. And unfortunately for Denver, Jamal Murray is also not playing 100%, so that's sort of factoring into this. And I think that really gives Anthony Edwards an edge, especially because a player like Anthony Edwards, who is tall, who is very athletic, physical, gifted, very versatile, he shoots the three very well, so you have to guard him at the perimeter. So you're forced to cover him no matter where he is on the floor, and he can drive right past you, he can make a move and shoot a shot, a three-pointer or a jump shot, he can do it all. And it really spaces out the floor and gives a lot more space for Minnesota to run an offense and to score. And the thing that stands out the most to me besides their rising star Anthony Edwards is that Minnesota, for the first time in probably a decade, is making size an important aspect of the game again. Which, to me, when we went to this whole small ball, focus on shooting the three, your bigs have to be able to guard the perimeter, play on the perimeter, that whole game was just nonsense. I get being talented and having a more diverse skill set, but that doesn't mean you can't. What got me was that you were using size was considered a disadvantage unless you were larger than your defender. To me, size is all about being able to move people around and being able to take advantage of mismatches. And so you should be able to rebound the ball well. You should be able to score points in the paint. You should be able to beat teams up so by the time you get to the second half, the other team is worn out. That to me is what size is all about. And with the whole focus on the perimeter game, you just didn't see the same level of that. And what's unique with Minnesota is that not only do they play one somewhat traditional center, not really a post-up guy, and Karl Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert, who are 7 foot and 7'1" respectively, but they do play closer to the basket. They can be very physical, and I think both of their presence on the floor at the same time, which I don't think any other team in the NBA does, presents a significant challenge to Denver, who is not only a much smaller team, but Nikola Jokic, the Joker, he is much more used to playing a more wittier type of basketball. He makes moves, he shoots shots, but he's just very good fundamentally in terms of how he can create shots for himself or create shots for others. And he's 6'11", so he does match up with Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns, from a size perspective. But I think the fact that both of them are on the floor, the fact that Aaron Gordon, who is Denver's power forward, is only 6'9", I think the size is really going to force Denver to play a different style of game, which is faster, and it's not a game that they're going to be comfortable with playing. In other words, if the Nuggets don't slow the game down, this is going to be a very short series. And while I do believe this series is going to go 7 games, I feel like it is going to be very Minnesota dominated. I don't expect any blowouts this series. I expect maybe one game to be by double digits going forward from this point. Unless, because of the size of Minnesota, Denver could really just get beat up, and by the end of the series is just worn out. Because the other problem that Denver has is not only do they not have the size to compete with Minnesota, they don't have the bench. Their second best player, and Jamal Murray, is injured still, and will probably be for the rest of the series. And then their tallest player coming off the bench is DeAndre Jordan, who's kind of old and washed. He's not in his prime anymore. And while he is 6'11", he only played 10 minutes last game. He scored 11 points on 74% shooting, which is pretty good. But I think the strategy going into game 2 has to be playing off DeAndre Jordan more, because I think as talented as Aaron Gordon is, he is not going to be able to match up from a points in the paint and defending the paint perspective in the same way against Minnesota that if DeAndre Jordan can get going the way he can. I think physical presence is something that the Denver Nuggets need to sort of try to match up with. They're not going to lead in that category, but closing the gap in the rebounds per game, closing the gap in the points in the paint. They're going to lose bench points. That is a given. There is no way Denver's bench is as talented. Because here's the other thing. Coming off of Minnesota's bench is Naz Reid, and he's 6'9". And so immediately once Gobert or Karl Anthony Towns gets tired from working on Jokic, or running up and down the floor, scoring in the fast break. You're going to have Naz Reid coming off the bench who can score points on his own, and he's going to be fresh. Versus Nikola Jokic, who's staying out there for a significant portion of the game. Aaron Gordon, who's staying out there for a significant portion of the game. They're not going to be able to compete with a fresh body, especially with someone who's as talented coming off the bench as Naz Reid. So, does Denver have a shot in this series? Well, absolutely. I mean, I would never rule, Nikola Jokic out. I think Nikola Jokic is a top 3 candidate for MVP this year. Whether he wins it, I don't know. I think Denver's a really talented team at the top. But I'm not sure how much Nikola Jokic carried this team versus some of the other teams that made it into the playoffs, like SGA or Chet Holmgren with the Thunder. But, I think, like I said, for Denver to try to win this series, DeAndre Jordan has to play more minutes, and he has to be more impactful, both on the offensive and defensive end. Keep Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert in check. Close the gap on the points in the paints and the rebounds. I think Nikola Jokic, he, as long as he can score consistently in 20 points per game or more, maybe closer to 30 probably is needed for this series. I think Jamal Murray, as long as he can have an impact on the game, that needs to happen. And then there has to be some sort of way to contain Anthony Edwards, and you have to have some sort of multiplayer game plan against him. Because like I said, because Anthony Edwards can shoot the 3, you have to guard him at the perimeter. So you have to find some sort of way to be able to help when he goes for a drive or tries to shoot a jump shot, but not at the sacrifice of Anthony Edwards being able to pass out of his shot and catch Gobert for a pick and roll, or Karl Anthony Towns for a pick and roll, or some of the other talented players on Minnesota's team. Now, looking at the regular season, these teams played each other 4 times, 2 times in each place, obviously, and surprisingly, each team won in each arena, and they tied for the season series 2-2. So it's hard to sort of go off that for gauging how this series is going to go. Like I said, this feels 7 games, but the fact that Minnesota took home court advantage in the first game, and pretty much, it was close for a significant portion of the game. So I still feel that losing home court advantage in the very first game, in game 1, is not a good sign for the Nuggets. I think they come out in game 2 setting the tone. I think they finish the first half up. How much? I don't know. Maybe under 5 points. But I think Denver needs to make a statement in game 2. They definitely can't go down 0-2 to Minnesota. That's going to be terrible. I think if you can, like I said, tie the series in game 2, and then in games 3 and 4, you have to steal one, obviously, because you lost home court advantage, so you have to steal one. Try to go up 2-1, so that would be kind of tough winning back-to-back games. So maybe you tie the series at 2-2, so win the second game, come back, win the third game, and then you're up 3-2, and then obviously you have to win game 6 at that point on the road, which would be kind of difficult. And like I said, I think Denver really needs to front load this series just from an energy perspective, just because they're going to get worn out. They are going to get worn out, no depth. And I think Minnesota, if this series does go to, say, 7 games instead of like 5 or 6, this is a Minnesota series. I think Minnesota would take it, just because they have way more energy, way more talent, that can play in the games longer. So, with that being said, the Orlando Magic and the Cleveland Cavaliers, their game 7 is today. So the fact that we played game 1 yesterday of Denver and Minnesota was kind of weird, but okay, I'll deal. Obviously, we've got, I know Pacers-Knicks game 1 is on Monday. I think the other series, is it the Thunder and the Mavs? I think they also kick off on Monday. Don't quote me on that one. I could be wrong. I feel like because the Orlando-Cleveland game is today, that Boston and whoever wins that game will be on Tuesday. So, like I said, if this game goes the distance, this is the Minnesota series. If the Nuggets can get things under control and, say, win 2 out of the next 3 games, I think that they could potentially win a game 6 and win it all. That would just be difficult considering that game 6 is at Minnesota. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video. We'll see how the series goes. I'm going to be watching it. I'm very excited for it. We'll catch you all on the next update. Thanks.